A $50,000 drone is forcing militaries to fire missiles that cost as much as $3 million. Now imagine hundreds of those drones attacking at the same time. That simple cost imbalance is quietly reshaping modern warfare. But the consequences go far beyond the battlefield. If this trend continues, it could trigger a global weapons production race worth more than $1 trillion and send shockwaves through the global economy. To understand why, we need to step back and examine the industrial system that underpins modern warfare. For decades, the dominant military doctrine of advanced economies relied on extremely sophisticated and expensive weapons systems. These platforms delivered overwhelming technological superiority, but they were never designed for rapid mass production. Missile defense networks such as the Patriot system or the Terminal High Altitude Area Defense Platform depend on complex electronics, precision rocket motors, and highly specialized components. Their production pipelines are slow, expensive, and deeply dependent on multinational supply chains. Manufacturing these systems requires years of capital investment and highly specialized labor. Increasing production cannot happen overnight. It requires careful industrial planning and long lead times. In other words, these systems were designed for technological superiority, not industrial scalability. At the same time, a new generation of weapons has emerged. These systems are radically different. Modern attack drones and loitering munitions can often be produced using commercially available components. They require far less specialized manufacturing and can be built quickly in large numbers. This shift fundamentally changes the economics of warfare. Modern conflicts are no longer decided purely by technological sophistication or tactical maneuvering. Increasingly, they are determined by industrial capacity, manufacturing speed, and the economic endurance required to sustain supply chains over time. The strategic advantage is moving away from the nation with the most advanced weapons. Instead, it increasingly favors the nation that can build and replace equipment at scale. In effect, modern warfare is evolving into an industrial contest, and that contest begins with a striking economic imbalance. The basic math of modern drone warfare is surprisingly simple. Many advanced interceptor missiles cost between $1 and $3 million per launch. Meanwhile, many attack drones and loitering munitions cost between $20,000 and $50,000 to manufacture. When an incoming drone appears on radar, defensive protocols often require multiple interceptor launches to guarantee destruction. That means millions of dollars can be spent in seconds to destroy a threat that costs the attacker only a fraction of that amount. The imbalance becomes even more dramatic when swarm tactics are introduced. Instead of sending one drone, attackers can deploy dozens or even hundreds simultaneously. Each additional drone forces the defender to make a difficult decision: either launch another expensive interceptor or risk allowing the attack to succeed. If dozens of drones approach simultaneously, the defending side may be forced to launch tens or even hundreds of interceptor missiles. The defensive cost of stopping that attack can quickly climb into the hundreds of millions of dollars. Some models estimate that a large swarm attack could force defensive costs between $100 million and $300 million for a single engagement. That financial imbalance is the central problem of modern air defense, but the economic consequences extend far beyond the battlefield. The broader macroeconomic effects of this imbalance are already visible. Early stages of recent conflicts generated massive economic costs in extremely short periods. Some estimates suggest the United States economy absorbed roughly $37 billion in costs within the first 100 hours of major escalation. Sustained military operations and interceptor deployments can cost roughly $1 billion per day. As defensive stockpiles are depleted, governments must rapidly replenish them. In response to this accelerated consumption, the Pentagon has already requested supplementary funding packages worth tens of billions of dollars to sustain procurement and replenish interceptor inventories. These emergency procurement cycles ripple outward through global markets. Energy markets are often the first to react. When geopolitical tensions escalate in key energy regions, oil markets quickly incorporate a geopolitical risk premium. In some recent cases, crude prices rose rapidly from roughly $70 per barrel toward $80, before approaching $95 within days. Financial models now explore scenarios where oil could reach $120 per barrel. More extreme projections even consider tail risk spikes approaching $200 per barrel. These price shocks then cascade through the global economy. The first layer of impact appears at the household level. For American households, rising energy prices act as an immediate and regressive tax on purchasing power. Fuel prices rise quickly, eroding discretionary income. Because nearly every product in the economy moves through diesel-powered logistics networks, higher fuel prices gradually increase the cost of groceries, retail goods, and transportation. In effect, consumers absorb the cost of geopolitical instability each time they visit a supermarket or fill their gas tank. Energy inflation also creates broader financial pressure. Rising energy costs feed directly into consumer price index calculations. When inflation expectations rise, bond markets react by pushing yields higher. Higher bond yields translate into higher mortgage rates and higher borrowing costs for businesses. This creates a difficult challenge for central banks. Reducing interest rates could ignite further inflation. Raising rates could slow economic growth. This creates a narrow and uncomfortable policy path for institutions like the Federal Reserve. Beyond households, the industrial landscape begins to shift. Defense manufacturers and aerospace companies often receive large inflows of capital as governments accelerate weapons procurement. When interceptor inventories are depleted, governments must replenish them. That creates long-term contracts for missile manufacturers, aerospace companies, and defense contractors. As a result, defense equities and aerospace manufacturing sectors often rally during periods of geopolitical escalation. At the same time, other industries face severe disruptions. Airlines and global logistics companies suffer when airspace closures or conflict zones interrupt major transport corridors. Freight routes become longer and more expensive. Shipping insurance costs surge. These disruptions ripple through global supply chains. Technology companies are also increasingly exposed to new forms of geopolitical risk. Recent attacks on digital infrastructure demonstrate that modern conflicts increasingly extend into economic and technological assets. Cloud computing facilities, data centers, and communication networks are becoming part of the expanded battlefield. While Western economies struggle with rising costs and supply chain vulnerabilities, China occupies a very different position. Decades of strategic planning have allowed China to build enormous industrial capacity. The country has invested heavily in renewable energy, hydroelectric infrastructure, and electric transportation networks. These investments have significantly reduced China's dependence on imported oil. As a result, China's energy self-sufficiency rate is estimated to approach 84%. China also imports only a relatively small share of its total energy supply from volatile Gulf shipping routes. Meanwhile, long-term energy agreements with Russia provide additional supply stability. These factors shield Chinese manufacturing from many of the energy disruptions affecting Western economies. China is also expanding its geopolitical influence during periods of Western military engagement. Infrastructure investments, alternative payment systems, and regional financial partnerships allow Beijing to offer economic alternatives to dollar-centric financial systems. At the same time, emerging markets face greater vulnerability. Countries such as India rely heavily on imported energy. In many developing economies, energy expenses account for between 30 and 50% of total household spending. This compares with only 8 to 12% in advanced economies. As oil prices rise, these countries face immediate pressure. Higher energy costs weaken currencies, drain foreign exchange reserves, and trigger capital flight. Manufacturing sectors experience higher input costs. Agricultural supply chains become more expensive. In extreme scenarios, these pressures can produce food insecurity and political instability. All of these regional pressures converge on the global financial system. One of the most critical vulnerabilities lies in the Strait of Hormuz. This narrow maritime corridor carries roughly 20 million barrels of oil per day, approximately 20% of global supply. Any disruption to this flow would force global energy markets to rapidly rebalance. The financial implications are enormous. The global energy derivatives market holds contracts valued between $600 trillion and $1 quadrillion in notional exposure. Yet the actual liquidity supporting these markets is dramatically smaller. If oil prices spike violently, margin calls could ripple through the financial system. Banks, hedge funds, and clearinghouses could face severe liquidity stress. At the same time, sovereign wealth funds in energy-producing states manage trillions of dollars in global investments. These funds play a central role in recycling oil revenues back into international financial markets. This system, often referred to as petrodollar recycling, has long supported global liquidity and helped finance government debt. If geopolitical tensions disrupt that flow, the consequences could reverberate through global financial markets. The transmission mechanism for this shock follows a predictable sequence. First, geopolitical risk pushes oil prices higher. Second, Shipping insurance and freight rates rise as vessels avoid conflict zones. Third, higher fuel costs increase transportation and logistics expenses worldwide. Fourth, those higher costs filter through supply chains and appear in consumer prices after a delay of roughly 60 to 90 days. Finally, central banks react by tightening monetary policy to control inflation. Higher interest rates then slow investment, hiring, and economic growth. Financial markets react quickly to these developments. Defense and aerospace stocks often rise as investors anticipate sustained government spending. Meanwhile, technology supply chains and semiconductor manufacturing face elevated geopolitical risks. Industrial metals and precious metals often surge during periods of inflationary pressure and currency uncertainty. In some extreme scenarios, gold and silver prices spike as investors seek safe haven assets. The derivatives market simultaneously experiences surging trading volumes as institutions attempt to hedge exposure to volatile energy markets. Looking further ahead, the long-term implications are profound. Modern warfare is shifting toward industrial production capacity. Victory may depend less on technological sophistication and more on manufacturing scale. Mass production of drones, automated weapons, and electronic warfare systems could become the decisive factor in prolonged conflicts. To address the cost imbalance of firing $3 million missiles at $50,000 drones, militaries are already exploring new defensive technologies. These include layered air defense systems, electronic warfare tools, and directed energy weapons that use electricity instead of expensive kinetic interceptors. Low-cost interceptor drones are also emerging as an alternative defense strategy. Some automated interceptor systems cost only a few $1,000s, but can destroy far more expensive incoming threats. If these systems become widely adopted, they could restore economic balance to air defense. But the larger shift remains. Modern warfare is becoming an industrial competition. The decisive advantage may belong to the nation capable of sustaining the largest manufacturing base and maintaining resilient supply chains. In that environment, the true battlefield is no longer only land, sea, or air. It is factories, supply chains, budgets, and financial systems. And that leads to a deeper question. If the cost of defending against cheap autonomous weapons continues to rise faster than industrial production capacity, can modern economies actually afford the wars of the future?